Hey. Hey, y'all, and welcome back to Nightshift with Andrea up late. We were trying to do. Are you good?
My camera, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay, there we go. Welcome back to Nightshift with Andrea up late. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We are coming at you with a little bit of a different time today. Again, it's summertime. Everything's different. We're kind of on an every 2-week schedule instead of every one. Our times kind of shift for all kinds of reasons, but I digress. We're here.
The number one reason is to go to the beach.
It's to go to the beach. Y'all, it's summertime. We love you. Well, we do love the beach. So welcome back again. This is a true crime podcast if you are new here. So that way you should know what to expect. And Brian Sanders is my co-host. He's a retired homicide lieutenant. So that always helps when we are talking about investigations and all of these kinds of things. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm good.
You doing good?
I swore I was not going to mess up my microphone.
Did you?
And I did, just for a split second.
What did you do?
You were talking, so there may have been a slight echo.
Oh, okay. Well, we can't really start the show without an echo, I believe.
No.
So we usually air around 8-ish on Tuesday nights, you guys, on YouTube, live on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. So I say that to say that you can always hop in the chats. It's free. Just log into YouTube and get to chatting along with everybody. We always enjoy that. Tonight, we probably aren't engaging quite as much. We're going to try to get through this one without it going quite as long. But then you can always listen wherever you stream your audio podcast, so your iTunes, Spotify, etc. So we always ask that you guys would just try to remember to hit the likes and the thumbs ups and respond and all those buttons.
Then the subscribe buttons.
And the subscribe buttons. And the narrative, you can just write whatever you want to write.
And people could post a comment or a question.
Mm-hmm.
And you would engage and answer.
Yeah, we talk to people all the time.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
I'm just saying for the shy people out there.
Oh, yeah, please do. We encourage it.
Yeah.
And you can always email AndreaUplate@yahoo.com if you don't have Instagram. Instagram is where you're going to find photos from the cases we cover and some narrative, things like that, some interaction. So do get Instagram if you don't have it, and follow us there. And if not, then you can always email us any case suggestions or those kinds of things. But I digress. We're going to talk about a case that you and I, Brian, have never, ever talked about. I don't even, do you even know what case we're covering tonight?
I don't. I just realized we haven't even,
not at all.
Mention it to me. I don't know what era, decade.
Which is not the norm. Usually he may know the name of a victim or a perpetrator, and maybe some highlights around the case. And we discuss some things if I have questions as I'm studying up. But on this one, we have not discussed. So I say, let's do it. We're going to be talking about the West Coast. So we are coming to you guys tonight from the East Coast. And this case takes place all the way out west in California. I know we've got a lot of California listeners. So you guys may be familiar with this. I will tell you, I find that this case has cases, there's more than a couple of things here. Very limited amount of information to find.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've run into this before, but when things happened decades ago, depending on how it was reported upon initially and how things were documented initially, that, that's really all. We can't go back and, find new things to, new journalist reports and new things like that, right? Like, so whatever is out there is out there. And it's not a whole lot, unfortunately, on these cases. But this is going to be called, it's notoriously known as like the Torrey Pines murders. And sometimes it'll go by the victims' names. But we're going to be talking about Barbara Nantais and Claire Huff. So, and I don't know if Claire's last name, it's pronounced like Hough. And so sometimes that can be Ho, like the GH is silent. Either way, I'm going to say Huff because I've heard it reported upon that way a little bit, but we'll go with that. So the area of Torrey Pines is located in Southern California, just a few miles north of San Diego. Like, it is within San Diego, but it's not within the city limits as far as I can understand. It's a beautiful coastal town. It has notable challenging golf courses and tournaments, hiking trails. It has the famous Torrey pine trees. So this is actually the location where not one, but two horrific murders took place decades ago. Barbara Nantais was 15 years old in 1978. Barbara was a cheerleader and she was a sophomore. She just finished her sophomore year in high school, about to go into her junior year. I'm going to pull up a picture here for anybody that is watching us. And so Barbara was looking forward to turning 16. She wasn't there just yet. And her brother will talk about how she was looking forward to learning, excuse me, how to drive. So there's a photo of Barbara. So again, 15 years old. So she was said to have loved the sunshine. And this worked well for her because she had been dating 17-year-old Jim Alt. And Jim was an avid surfer. So again, y'all, it's 1978. They're in Southern California. He was a teenager fully immersed in that life. He had long bleached blonde hair. In fact, just around the time that what we're talking about took place, Jim had been photographed for a wetsuit magazine. And so these days, like current day, when he recalls that time, he does it with a smile, and he'll say that he felt like quite the local celebrity. So he and his buddies that were, in that magazine would hand him out for autographs and those kinds of things. And so I can see that. We live in a beach town. I could see something like that, particularly back then.
Mm-hmm.
So Barbara and Jim had been dating for about 9 months. And on Saturday, August 12th, 1978, Barbara's mom and dad, Judy and Ralph, were leaving for the weekend. So they told the kids to, be safe. They had a family friend coming to kind of watch out and hang out with them for the weekend. So, of course, all the kids oblige and say that they're going to be safe. But Barbara's sister recalls, she'll say it kind of laughingly, that their parents had hardly even gotten the car out of the driveway before Barbara and Jim left for the coast. Like they were going out to the beach. So there were other parts of the coastline that they could have visited that were a bit closer to where Barbara lived. But Jim and Barbara really liked the Torrey Pines area. So, and we can account for that too, right? Like there are some places, it depends on the day, the time of year, the time of week as to which beach you want to go to. So this one seemed like the type of area, and you guys, if you live there current day, at some point either chime in or send me a message. Let me know if it's the same. Like it sounds like at least back in 78, adults as well, but a lot of teenagers would kind of stumble upon the area. There was a parking area and then like a bunch of different like fire pit locations, and everybody would hang out, maybe have drinks, maybe not, have these fires going, and then a lot of times camp out like that right there against the beach. So they head off to Torrey Pines, and they had plans with their friends, Rick and Cynthia, to camp at the beach. So teens and adults alike were there when they all arrived, and they hung out with everyone. Then Rick and Cynthia, their friends, chose to sleep in their car just kind of right there in the parking lot adjacent to the beach. And Jim and Barbara zipped up their sleeping bags together and fell asleep, holding onto each other near a campfire right there in the sand. So Jim began to stir around dawn. He'll say now, like when he talks about it, he didn't talk about this for a long time, but now he'll say that he knew something was terribly wrong immediately, but he was very confused. He felt that there was like a wetness, and he felt extremely weak. It was still a bit dim out, but the light was starting to get brighter and brighten the day, and he saw no sign of Barbara around him. So he crawls toward the parking area. He'll use the adjective sometimes. I lunged, I crawled, I stumbled. He's able to get himself to the parking area and gets to Rick's car. He slams his hand on the window there, and Rick recalls that he only knew it was even Jim at all because he could see some long blonde hair. He said that his face was covered in blood. He knew something terrible had happened to him. So he looked terrified, and Rick asked him where Barbara was, and Jim said he didn't know. So Rick says that he jumps out of his vehicle, runs down the beach looking for Barbara. And as he races down, he said that he looked for a minute, and then he thought he saw her lying by the lifeguard tower. But he was horrified at what he saw when he got near her. She was lying at the foot of the lifeguard tower. She was nude. Her legs had been positioned to be spread wide, and she had blood, a lot of blood on her. So Rick says that he honestly says that he can not remember exactly, right? Like what happened in that moment, except for that he knows he screamed for someone to call 911, to call police. I should say probably just to call police at that time. And he said, I don't know. I just grabbed a sleeping bag and threw it on top of her. It was evident that she was not alive when he found her. So first responders get there. Jim is rushed immediately to the hospital. So he had horrible skull fractures that we'll talk about here in a moment. So Jim had been beaten over the head multiple times, both with a rock and I'll try to find some pictures to show you guys or to put on Instagram. So you're talking like, a good size, like a larger than your hand size rock, okay? With a rock and then also with a log from the campsite. He remained in a coma for days after the attack, and to this day, he says he has no memory of that night whatsoever, outside of them going to bed. Barbara had been beaten over the head as well. Her body had been dragged to where it was eventually found there under the lifeguard tower. She had been sexually assaulted. She was actually strangled to death, and her left breast had been mutilated. Also, something important to note, sand had been stuffed in her mouth. So sand was in her mouth and down her throat. So there wasn't much in the way of bleeds initially. Detectives collected the sleeping bag that they had used. They collected a cigarette butt found there at the scene near Barbara's body, multiple bloody rocks, and firewood logs. These were thought initially and proven to be the ones that were that Jim and Barbara had been beaten over the heads with. They collected fingernail scrapings, vaginal swabs, and then the necklace that Barbara had been wearing that night. So the next week was spent conducting multiple interviews. There were no witnesses whatsoever. So when they are, asking anybody if they heard anything, saw anything, no one had. They were talking to everyone they can find that had been in that area that night. And it was difficult for investigators to know if it had been a single attacker or if it was actually multiple people. So it did feel like Jim and Barbara, though, unfortunately, were just randomly chosen for this attack. There didn't seem to be an angle or that they were targeted in any kind of way. So interviews, unfortunately, weren't really taking any direction. There really weren't any leads that became of anything. So the case really just kind of cooled off and went cold, kind of early-ish on. I think that they found themselves kind of at a dead end. So I love Judy's description. So Judy is Barbara's mother. And so years went on, and one of the interviews she did, I believe with CBS, or actually I think it was with 48 Hours. And Judy says, in describing her daughter, she says, she was a popular, defiant, beautiful, pain in the ass, wonderful daughter. God gave her to me to keep me humble, and it worked. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was such a really great, cool description. Sadly, though, for years, Ralph, Barbara's dad, blamed Jim for Barbara's death. And he talks about it in interviews. He'll say, I was angry with him. He was there to keep my daughter safe, and he did not do it, and he took her out of the house when she wasn't supposed to go. Jim was 17. Yeah. He was a kid. Barbara went too. They both, and we all know if you're around teenagers, like these things happen. Thankfully, though, that went on for years, but eventually, and I don't have it written in quotes here, but her dad did write Jim a letter that basically said, like how I had blamed you for, you were the only one that was there to keep my daughter safe when I was gone, and you did not. But basically now I know that you did what any other red-blooded American boy would have done that night. And what happened was a 1 in a million chance. So they made their amends. Jim has had lifelong effects of his injuries from the attacks. He had a metal plate put in his head. He was prone to anger. He got into a lot of fights over the years. He had some pretty deep depressive episodes. He contemplated suicide over the years, like just a lot of kind of getting through that. Also, I'm not sure, like the nurse in me then wants to kind of go through this, but I don't know exactly where the metal plate was put. One of the articles did read to the front of his skull, and if so, that's your frontal lobe, that's your personality. So when he talks about just he never felt himself after, I mean, obviously it can be from just the emotional trauma of everything, and it could physically be from his injuries as well. He will say that he is thankful that his last memory of being with Barbara was them lying on the beach looking at the stars, because he does remember them zipping the sleeping bags and going to bed that night and then it was lights out. He's got nothing else. So get this, nothing happens for a long time. And when I say it went cold, it doesn't mean obviously that they weren't investigating anything, but it was 78. You guys remember, we talk about it all the time. DNA technology there wasn't much there. I mean, they knew that they had her blood and his blood, and they knew that they had, I think at least the cigarette butt had an unidentified male DNA on it, but they couldn't even in that moment for sure say that it had to do with the case at all, really. So, there wasn't much to go off up here. So on August 24th, though, 1984, so 6 years almost to the date, because it was August 12th of 78 when the attack happened with Barbara and Jim. So August of 84, Another teen was found, and this was Claire Huff. She was a 14-year-old whose body was found on that very same beach. Not the same lifeguard tower, but near a different lifeguard tower right down the beach strand in a very similar location or close location. So Claire was born in 1969, and she was raised in Cranston, Rhode Island. She loved rock music. Her bedroom was plastered with posters of rock stars, but Claire often visited her grandparents in San Diego. So she'd travel the country and come all the way back over to the West Coast and visit her grandparents. So her best friend, Kim, from Rhode Island, would come with her often on these trips. And so she did on this particular summer. And on this night, Claire and Kim went to Torrey Pines Beach. Kim says, though, even in current day interviews, that she doesn't know how to describe it other than she feels she had a premonition. She said, I don't know. We were there for just a few minutes, and I just thought something just washed over me, and I didn't like it. And she said, I told her we need to go. She said, I didn't like the idea that somebody could just be here and no one, like, we wouldn't know it until it was too late. And she said, like, to this day, that makes her, that she can understand, she can remember what that feeling was like. And so they get back to Claire's grandparents' house that evening. And she said that she looked at Claire and made her promise her that she would, because Kim had to go back to Rhode Island, right? So she had to go on back to her family. But she said she made Claire promise her she would not sneak out, because Claire, I think they sneak out from the grandparents' house that night to go. And she said, I told her to promise me she wouldn't sneak out again and go down there. She said, I didn't like how I felt when we were there that night. But that's not what happened. And Claire did, in fact, go back. So Claire was beaten over the head. So pay attention to Claire's injuries as well. Okay. She was beaten over the head, sexually assaulted, strangled to death, and had a breast mutilated. The autopsy revealed that her larynx was stuffed with sand. So we have, not even similar, right? We have the exact same types of injuries that happened. So I'm going to read to you now. I think this was from a CBS article. And this is where her parents are talking about something that kind of started taking place that was very, very strange not long after Claire was found. So let's see here. Sorry, you guys. Let me get to my... Okay. So Sam and Penny Huff are Claire's parents, okay? And they say that they were approached by a man named Wallace Wheeler. So Wallace Wheeler was actually the man who was just a beachcomber, just walking the beach that day, and he was the one who stumbled upon Claire's body, okay? But then he starts reaching out to her parents, and he said, I'm a psychic. And so they said that he had his arm outstretched, and this is, I'm reading verbatim from the CBS News article. Penny said, he said, hi, I'm Wally Wheeler. I'm a psychic. And they say it just got weirder and weirder from there, because he went on for like over an hour talking to him about how he could see her. He could see at night. He had been a fighter pilot. They thought he was just super bizarre. And so they called the police, because they're like, I don't like this guy. Like, I don't like the things he's saying, the way he's talking about our daughter. And the police actually encouraged them to continue communicating with him, right? Hoping that he may let something go, right? Like may let them onto something, and maybe he'd confess or something. But he says that he keeps seeing Claire come to him in his, like, these visions that he would have. And so he said, that was why she let me see her smiling face, and really her eyes were radiant. This is in a letter. So he started writing multiple letters to Claire's parents. And so, like, her dad's point is, this guy found my daughter's bloody, beaten body, like, and she is a child, but he's writing me letters talking about this radiant smile and eyes. And, they're really just so confused, and really just, this did not sit well with them. So this went on for a while. He never confessed to anything. And then the letters stopped. And then they heard that Wallace Wheeler had actually killed himself. So evidently he jumped off the top of a building, like a 13-story building, and died. So investigators will say that he was looked at early on as a suspect in Claire's death. But they had since ruled him out. And I mean, I think just chalking it up to kind of a wacko, right?
Yeah.
So even though this was so similar to Barbara's death, police didn't let either family know that that was the case, right? That there were similarities in these girls' deaths. And it was not until 2008, so now it's been quite a while, you guys, that the families learned that the cases could be connected. So That's where I'm trying to read my handwritten notes that I scratch out every week. So the investigation into Claire's death fizzled sooner than had hoped, kind of like with Barbara's murder, right? But finally in 2012, so again, these took place in 78 and 84. So in 2012, there were new advances, of course, in DNA, and a lead was generated. Okay, so when samples from Claire's body were returned, 2 DNA hits came back. One circled back to a convicted rapist named Ronald Tatro, and I'm going to show you him. This is Ronald. Let me show you a little picture of Claire, actually. So here's Claire. If you remember, here is Barbara. Mm-hmm. Again, I'll have these photos on Instagram on Andrea Update. Here's Jim as well, by the way. This is Barbara and Jim. That's what he looked like at the time. This was Jim after it all happened. It's blurry, I think, to come through the screen here. If you were to see closer, you could see his face is still a bit swollen. His eyes are kind of red from the attacks, but obviously his head was shaved because of all his surgeries. But either way, so that's Barb, and then here is Claire. So we have similarities. Obviously, they're both white female brunettes. And then Barbara was a 15-year-old. Claire was 14 at the time of her attack and murder. So here's another photo of Claire. But so I just told you that a couple of DNA hits came back when the forensics was all like retested in 2012. And I told you that one of them came back to this guy. This is Ronald Tatro. So he was a convicted rapist, in and out of prison. And it was actually his blood that was found on Claire's jeans. Okay, at the scene. So the other DNA hit came back actually to an employee in the San Diego Police Department lab, Kevin Brown. Mm-hmm. That's interesting, right? Because that is the agency that is handling this case. That's a picture of Kevin back when he was working with the police department, not as a criminologist like in the lab. Okay. So there was no chance to interview the rapist, Donald Tatro, though, because he had died previously the year prior in a boating accident in Tennessee, of all places. So Kevin Brown, the former criminologist, retired from his duties in 2002. So this would be about a decade after he retired that this DNA comes back. So detectives knocked on the door of Kevin Brown's home. So Kevin and his wife, Rebecca, had been married for 20 years. Now, their marriage took place after these murders, right? They got married, I believe, in like 92. The detectives showed Kevin a picture of Ronald Tatro, the rapist guy, right? And so they asked Kevin if he knew Ronald or had ever met him. He said he didn't know him. He said, no, I've never seen him. I've never hung out with no, I don't know him. That's not a friend of mine. So then they showed him a picture of Claire Huff. And when they asked him if he recognized her, he said, oh, sure, I remember her. So then they say, okay, well, your DNA has been found in the evidence on her body. But they didn't tell him like where or how they found it. Now, the police continued to maintain that it was Kevin who first mentioned the possibility that it was found on a vaginal swab. I feel like that's maybe. Okay. I don't know that that's necessarily well documented. So they ramp up the investigation pretty quickly with Kevin Brown. And then that's what we're going to talk about, because is it because they had a great lead with this DNA, or did they get tunnel vision with Kevin Brown? Mm-hmm. So that same afternoon, they got a search warrant to search Kevin's property. They looked for any evidence they could find. They couldn't find anything that had to do with Claire. So he's basically his wife's freaking out because she's like, what are you talking about? This guy, he loves animals. He goes to church. We've all heard the same old song and dance. That does not mean he can't also be a bad guy, right? But to her point, they'd been married for a couple decades, and she had seen nothing of the sort. None of this made sense. But they start to get into Kevin's past, because he had a nickname evidently, earlier on when he had worked, and his nickname was Kinky Kevin Brown. And really, I know it's
like at work. That was it before.
Yeah. I think he had a way of, before he was married, he had, a certain lifestyle as a bachelor, and he had certain interests as a bachelor. And I think that he was open with his interest. And so that's how he got the name around work of that. Okay. So they talked about him kind of like going to strip clubs often. And they talk about him going to, quote, like dirty movies is what they would say. He'd go view dirty movies in public or whatever. But then there was some other stuff that was a little bit more unsettling. So evidently there was a criminologist that worked with Kevin Brown. And so she said that one time Kevin had taken a report of a violent rape. And when she was in a lab with him alone, that he was reading that report he had taken out loud. Mm-hmm. He read it to her, and she said that he made a remark along the lines of, well, isn't that funny? And kind of chuckled. Mm-hmm. And she said, obviously, like after that, she never felt really comfortable being alone with him in the lab mm-hmm. again. So when they look into his background, they find out that he enjoyed photography, and there was like this situation that he found himself in, like in the 80s. There's like the boudoir photography, right? Like, I mean, that still exists current day. But then it would be that like these women would hire, well, I say women, often it was women as the subjects, and a lot of times aspiring models or whatever, and would hire these photographers to take photographs of them, usually more in like a boudoir setting, like in lingerie or whatever. And that Kevin would like find out where these were taking place and go to assist with the photography of these. He enjoyed these. Again, he was a bachelor. He can do mm-hmm. whatever he wants to do. But they did have some clients who you could then book with like privately and take more risque photos mm-hmm. and kind of like, you know, it was a very different type of transaction at that point. So with him having these proclivities, detectives say that he like had this essentially like dirty background and all this and that. Mm-hmm. You know, we say it all the time, and I say every week, I think I'm going to make it a shirt, but like, can you be a creep and not be a murderer? Yep. Yeah. And I'm not even saying he was a creep. I mean, right. You know what I mean? They're just putting all of these things together and then using that as like his mm-hmm. character statement, kind of, so to speak. So who's to say? But that's the people who feel, and there would be some attorneys and some in law enforcement that feel that he was railroaded as well, in the sense of the tunnel vision, like that once this stuff was known about him, it was like, like we're really going to sit down on him. Now, granted, they're saying they did find his DNA on a swab from Claire's body, so that's very important as well. So, let's see here. So I think where it got weird is that when they say, like, did you know Claire Huff? And he's saying, no, I don't know who she is. But then when they asked if he'd actually met her, then he said, like, he started thinking. And then he recalled saying, like, yeah, I met someone named Claire in the 80s. And when they asked if he'd had sex with her, he said, possibly. It's possible. But he got deeper into trouble with them, evidently, because I guess he volunteered to take a lie detector test. Because they kind of, I mean, obviously, they've already performed a search warrant. They told him that they had his DNA at the scene. They're asking him all these questions, interviewing him. So he was like, can I please take a lie detector test? So they hook him up to a poly, and he fails it. So they tried to, like, you know, kind of good cop him, right? Like saying, I don't believe for a second that you actually thought she was 14. Like, it's okay. And he was like, oh, I had no idea. But then other people that were in on some of these interviews will say that he clarified and said, no, like he had dated a Claire for a while, but it was like a lady in her 20s in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Like, so none, you know, also this is 2012 and they're referencing his bachelor days in the 80s.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think it would sound good if he could even remember the names of all the women he'd been around, right? So, you know, but this is what they're using to go off of to kind of pinpoint this case. So evidently, though, they have a phone call, and I don't know if this is something that they've tapped. In 2012, they probably did. I don't really know how we have this phone call, but allegedly he called a friend, Kevin did, and just said, hey, the police are looking at me as a suspect. This girl I photographed on the beach ended up dead. And we've talked about these kinds of things where people could have been around a person and lied to police about being around them because they don't want to implicate themselves. Or he could have had consensual sex with the girl as well. You know what I mean? But I think that they were using this as kind of the linchpin, that phone call to the friend saying, well, he didn't say, hey, that girl I killed. He said that girl I took a photo of on the beach wound up dead. Like, they're looking at me as a suspect. So we'll see, right? But what happens now is that, just spoiler alert, we're done with the case in the sense of Barbara and Claire. Like, it is what it is. Like, those are the facts that were laid out. But it just comes down to finding out, obviously, who did this. And so we do have the blood on Claire's pants that belonged to the convicted rapist that was dead by the time they got these results back. So he can't even be interviewed. And then we have this former lab worker with the San Diego Police Department. So when you talk about DNA, though, and practices of DNA, this would have been in 1984 within their agency. They kind of start talking to other people who worked in that field at that time, and kind of what were the practices, what tended to be the mainstay. And so they said that, let's see here, because I have a specific, well, to that point, people that he worked with when he was working like on the cop side of things said that, for instance, like they didn't love getting him on the stand. Like if he had to go to trial for a case, because they're like, he could be bullied. They're like, he got nervous. Okay. You could make him almost say whatever you wanted him to say. They said he would always get very nervous. He could, and one of them chuckled saying like, he could be bullied. You could get him to, to prove your point. So then if he's kind of stumbling around as they're asking them, and he's the one that's being looked at under the microscope as the perpetrator, potentially the suspects, I feel like it's fair to hear that character assessment from his former coworkers.
Did he, maybe you're going to say it, but did he have, so this was obviously, he would have committed, if he committed this crime, it would have been before he ever joined their profession or their job or whatever. He was a tech, right? Or like a crime scene processor or whatever.
Mm-mm. He retired from there in 2002. This took place in 84. So, okay. So potentially. So
potentially he would have been working for them, or
it
somewhere
could have been
there.
right around there. Yep. Yeah. No, excuse me. I'm sorry. Let me tell the rest of the case that I know. No, he did. He was working there, because that gets into my whole next point.
Then let me be quiet.
No.
That's what I do. I sit over here and go, mm-hmm.
No, it's me not even thinking ahead, like to literally the next thing I'm going to say, which is no, he was working there. So in terms of the evidence or the DNA or the way that it was procured and processed and held onto, right? So evidently they talk about the cross contamination. So everything is airborne, right? So the swabs that they would use, so let's say the vaginal swab from Claire, it's going to be sitting upright, like in a structure to hold it up and on an open table, where if I'm speaking, if he's speaking, any of our airborne particles can land on that, thus cross-contaminate. Now you're going to have my DNA on that, because now they wear masks in those labs. Mm-hmm. They did not wear masks in the labs then. Mm-hmm. They did not wear gloves then. So all of the cross-contamination. So then the other side is going to argue, but it wasn't saliva, right? It wasn't sweat. It wasn't skin cells. It was seminal DNA that was found on her vaginal swab. So did you know about this? So in any science experiment, right, you have your variables and you have your constants. They call a constant a standard when it comes to forensics, and like in these labs. So the standard is what you're basing your results off of. So let's say I have a vial of Brian's saliva, and maybe that's what I'm using as my standard to use this test with, to see if it comes back and it does what it's supposed to do. I know it's his. Did it show that? Okay, I know this test works properly. This is what I'm going to use now. And now I'll use my subjects, right? So their standards, evidently there were a lot of budget cuts and whatnot, and to save the department money, and also just because it became the way to do things, often the lab techs that would use their own things, their own bodily fluids for the standard to then cross-test around. This includes semen. Did you know that?
No, I have never heard that.
Yeah. I learned that today.
I'm sorry.
Or whenever.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I mean, before you go accusing Tech of being a rapist, not you, I'm saying
no, I know.
Investigations like that should have been.
Well, it kind of makes you want to, I don't know, kind of look at some old cases. I mean,
yeah. I had never heard of that. That's wild.
I had not either.
Never mind.
Go ahead. What you got?
So they're just at work like, hey, I'll be back in a few minutes. I got to create a sample for a standard.
I mean, yeah. Yeah. Look, getting paid to do it.
Good Lord, all I wanted was a urine sample.
All I wanted was a urine sample.
What was that?
Well, I guess they'd provide those as well. I mean, yeah, isn't it wild? So
I've never heard that is.
Mm-hmm.
That's
so
crazy.
we're not wearing masks. We're not wearing gloves.
Mm-hmm.
We have open air samples, and then we're using. So he didn't specifically work on Claire Huff's case, but he worked alongside the processor who did. Okay. So it'd be like you and me here. So
maybe Kevin was like working overtime, giving them standards.
Well, I mean,
sorry.
Well, and there's another, like, even aside from that, there was one like investigator that was interviewed during this, like not an investigator on this case, but he independently like investigated other things. And he said he went to this one, it wasn't a lab, it was some other whatever place of business, right? And he was like, and I learned that inside that one company on the certain day shift, there were 2 daily masturbators. And one of them would be the start of his first shift every day, or his first break that he took for the day every day, 5 days a week. And the other one was on their lunch break.
They were the standards?
No, these were other people like separate from this case, but saying that this is someone else that was kind of interviewed during the talkings of these murders. But he was saying that, like, for instance, this is something that I, as like an independent like auditor, investigator, whatever he was, he'd go to other like companies. Mm-hmm. Something he found out about, like in this one company, there were 2 workers that worked the same shift that were doing this daily, like at work. And he's saying his point is kind of like, I guess if like old Kinky Kevin was already into some stuff, who's to say that he just did? I mean, like maybe these things could be taking place. No, I think you'd like to think that he would tell them that, like,
yeah, be like, hold up,
but. They didn't talk to I can't say this for sure. If they did speak to the detectives on the murder case about this, meaning his colleagues within the lab, within the forensics lab, it's not noted that it doesn't seem like they took note of that. But if they are now saying like, no, I worked alongside him, this was a normal practice, like this is what we did. You'd like to think investigators knew that already. Like, that's kind of a big deal. Yeah.
Because that's one of the first things I was thinking, and this is me, like, because we haven't talked about this at all. Right. So I'm actually like writing some notes as we're talking, and I wrote cross pollute. I couldn't. My brain couldn't come up with cross contaminate, and you were still talking. I was like, pollute works. I'll come back to that. But that was one of the... If we're
talking about using your own semen for a standard in a forensics, like criminology lab, that can be cross-polluting.
Yeah, well.
Jeez. So, unfortunately, what happens with this, it's pretty terrible. So it says for instance, at the time of Claire Huff's murder, criminalists would often bring their own seminal fluid to the lab and use it. So the word is often. And use it to ensure the chemicals used to detect semen were working correctly. And then these 2 individuals that were interviewed believed that all of the criminalists in the labs did it. So when they were asked if Kevin did it, they said, yeah, I think Kevin was doing the same thing. And they meant because it was such a mainstay, that's what they were all kind of doing. So evidently the San Diego Police Department were insisting that contamination was not possible, but the retired criminalists who worked there said they know what they saw. And they were like, they said most likely Kevin's semen standard, meaning the constant, right, was in the lab, and several analysts may have even had it. Like, because I mean, you may use someone else's, right? You're just doing these tests to make sure that the test actually works. Yeah. So whoever processed the DNA on Claire's body could have been using Kevin's standard as
let me also say in the last X number of years, DNA testing and stuff has gotten so great that you're picking up DNA off of items from people who maybe have shaken hands an hour before. I mean, everybody kind of knows that, but state the obvious.
No, for real. And let me go back, because I said they didn't wear gloves. They did. What I meant to reference is that they didn't switch gloves. So it's like they put them on to protect themselves from the stuff they're touching, but they weren't switching them to protect the integrity of what they had in front of them. So they go on to just like discuss more cross-contamination and all these kinds of things. But sadly, he was getting more and more worked up about all of this. Kevin was. And one day his wife, Rebecca, came home and his Bible, which he was a Sunday school teacher at, they went to a Catholic church. I'm not sure I think he worked with the children there some, but I guess the Bible was open to a Romans verse talking about accused, like ill accused, like, wrongly accused. And he left his wallet and a couple of things there. And anyway, his body was found the next day. He had gone to a local where they had a cabin in a park and hung himself. So as far as Barbara, and the first case we talked about, Barbara, that was at the Torrey Pines State Park with Jim, her case has never been solved. They don't have leads on that. On Claire's, police actually call it done because they think that it was Kevin Brown. And when he killed himself, they looked at that as basically an admission of guilt and have not continued to move forward with it. Evidently, if you look at Ronald, the rapist that we spoke about that died in a boating accident in Tennessee, we didn't really talk much about him other than his blood was found on her pants. Kind of a big deal. And he already did have crimes against kids. Like, it was a 16-year-old girl that he had raped prior. So I think that the point there is that on her autopsy, Barbara's autopsy showed more evidence of sexual assault with physical injuries there in a couple of areas. Okay. So on Claire's body, I think there was like one laceration to like inside her vagina. And I don't want to say that was it, like if she was sexually assaulted, but I mean that like it wasn't profound, like obvious results of a sexual assault. And so to the point of anyone who would defend Kevin Brown, they would say it wasn't really fully determined. Like there had not been semen found on her prior. So it wasn't until the new advances came out and they retested stuff that it showed that it was semen and it was Kevin Brown's. So if you're in Kevin Brown's defense, you're going to say she may have not even been sexually assaulted. She certainly wasn't in the way that Barbara was. I think everybody wants to think that these are pretty much connected. The cops have also come back to say that even though they were two girls, basically same age, same exact mode of death, same exact injuries, in the same exact location, they have no evidence to show that they are connected.
Wait a minute. Are you serious?
I know you don't have to be.
That doesn't make any sense.
So the guy, if I'm not mistaken, the one that was the rapist, whose blood was on Claire's pants, I think that he was in prison when Barbara was killed. Like he couldn't have been Barbara's killer. They can't seem to line up, at least out of any suspects they found, anyone who would have been available for both. Okay? In terms of alibis. Mm-hmm. So, could there have been a copycat? Sure. Or was one of the people that did something with her, Claire, was he not working independently, and someone else was there the first time and maybe he wasn't.
Because the sand thing is a little unique.
The sand lodged in the throat is unique. Well, and
area.
Yeah, the area, but also the mutilation of one breast in both of them, like with like a knife. Like it was a very specific situation. So, I don't know. It's just kind of a wild one. I don't feel like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's not just, like nothing has come of it. And I don't think this is one where we've talked about it, where you have like probable cause to charge and the person dies and it's over and you call it done, even though they never, That's kind of not what this was. Because I don't think you could, I think you've got a reasonable doubt, if nothing else. Like, even if Kevin Brown had gone to trial for this, had they charged him.
See, the problem is with him being a tech and having all that. That's why I was making those notes. Like, well, the first thing I'm going to think is, like, if you're a technician or an investigator, whatever you want to say, you process the crime scene and you work in a lab doing evidence. Like, first thing I think is, like, how does this become cross-contaminated? Then when you do due diligence and then you figure out how they're using samples as standards, then it's possible. I don't know. Like, that doesn't make me think like, oh my gosh, yeah, he's it. because you don't have any other pattern, at least that you know of, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing else happens in that area.
He likes strip clubs, right? Like that's like when you're looking at him, I'm just saying like he had no, and there's no other pattern like that. Let me tell you, I will go back right before we wrap it up. There was a third victim, and it's a bit of an outlier, and it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was between the two cases, or it could have been just after Claire's, but it was a 16-year-old male. And the similarity there, other than location and team, is that his head, like he'd been beaten. I don't think there was anything about like a sexual assault, and I don't think there was anything about sand found in his larynx either. And that could just be a weird coincidence, one-off. I mean, it could be that these things are happening because it is that secluded area and it's dark, and so somebody, violence can happen. But the two girls, that's wild. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not convinced it's a Kevin Brown, though. I can promise you that.
Yeah, that was, to me, now if you start saying, oh, we've got,
well, if they had his blood, or if they had fingerprints, if they had anything else.
But I mean, even like that, like there's no other history of it. He's a grown man. No. He's holding a job.
Yes.
Also, I think like back then, dudes sometimes just kind of blurted stuff. Not all guys, but some guys like.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
what?
Never mind.
Say it.
Let's say like my mom's friends, like.
Oh yeah.
Some of her drinking buddies and stuff. Like, man, this dude is.
Oh, telling all of his extracurriculars.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, stop! Like I'm a kid. Like you're a grown man acting like that. Or that like that loser dude she dated. I told you about. I was little, walking in this little mechanic shop because he's a truck driver of all things. And he had like nude women like pinned up on the wall.
I think you had to, right? If you worked in a body shop?
Well, my dad and uncles and all them didn't do that. Oh, you meant the body shop.
No, I meant the 80s in a body shop. That's what I meant. Like,
he was a loser.
I don't think, I'm sure he was, but I don't think that was a crazy thought.
Well, straight up disrespect.
Okay. All right. Well, we love you guys, and we did show up at a weird time tonight. So sorry about that. We got Michael Hendricks in the chats. Dude, you should have hit us up. You know, this is where we live. So
we were there actually.
We were there, but did you see where else he came? Here.
Oh, I missed that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, we probably were right beside him.
Oh, look where they went. Oh my gosh! Look at the restaurants they went to.
Come on.
They're all the time. They're all the time. Anyway, all right. Well, listen, we love you guys. If you're new here, follow us on all platforms. We'd love that, and we would appreciate you. And you can also find Brian Sanders separately for Brian Sanders Disruptors. It's or the Disruptors with Brian Sanders. All the things. Type in all combinations of that. He's basically the Zodiac, and he has his own show where he interviews a wide variety. It's kind of like a variety show, all types of different guests, and he has some really great shows lined up, and he's put out some really great ones recently. So check that out. Check him out online as well. But yeah, come hang out with us. Chat with us in the chats next week or in 2 weeks, whenever we come back. What you got?
It's probably going to be next week. When that class that I've mentioned with the National Training Company drops. So I'll be promoting that and pushing that out. That's for sworn law enforcement, I think. Okay. At this point, for right now.
Well, maybe we'll do a little promo for that.
Yeah,
cool. We should do that. All right. Well, listen, we appreciate you guys. Why don't you tell the people good night?
Good night, everybody.
It's not as late as usual. It feels weird to say that.
I know. The sun's up.
I know.
Tide's high.
All right. Well, until next week, we will see y'all next Tuesday. You sure did.